Hey guys, what's going on? George here with APG. I'm excited today. We've got a lot of different products to show you guys, and we've laid them all out on the tables here. We've got our Bronco mid-travel suspension system, which is known as our mid-runner. We now have our new to market standard Bronco long travel, which is similar to other long travel kits in the industry. We also have a full Bronco ProRunner suspension front and rear laid out on the two tables over on the end. We're gonna take you through each of these three product offerings, dive into the details, dive into the components, and the advantages, disadvantages. Let's jump into the details. All right guys, so I am sitting on a table in front of our Bronco mid-runner suspension system. Mid-runner has a significant performance increase over your stock non-Raptor Ford Bronco, utilizing some of the best shock systems in the world. You know, King is known, they've won countless competitive off-road races. We've worked with their engineers to come up with some compression and rebound settings on these shocks that we think you're gonna enjoy. And that essentially is mid-runner. It is a longer stroke front and rear shock with new spring rates, internal valving, got external remote reservoirs with compression adjusters that allows you to make some fine-tune adjustments if you've got some more load. And then pairing in the important things, rear trailing arms that are double adjustable, that allows you to correct your pinion angle, whatever ride height that you selected, and our new to market billet mid-travel upper control arms. These upper control arms we've already went through before, but they're incredible. They're double adjuster, meaning you don't need to pull the arm out and adjust the heims. You can do it while you're on the car, so you can dial in your alignment, not using all the lower heim joints. If you do plan on running any larger tire than stock, or doing really any form of rock crawling, we always recommend some sort of heavy duty tie rod system. For a 35 to a 37 inch tall tire, we found that the Ford Performance heavy duty 16 millimeter rod diameter tie rods are more than sufficient. OEM replacement part does just fine for a 35 or 37 inch tall tire. All right, so this suspension system is for the driver that wants to stay stock width, not increase their overall track width, get a modest suspension increase, couple of inches of additional wheel travel, while keeping that factory track width. And if you want to get out and do a little bit of forest driving, a little bit of desert driving, this is going to get you the added punch over a stock suspension. All right, guys, I'm now in front of another table, a bit more crowded table. This is our standard Bronco long travel suspension system, front and rear. As you know, APG is the only builder in the market that has a true long travel rear suspension system. The front suspension system is completely bolt-on. We have removed a lot of the building materials that you see in our ProRunner suspension, but the best way to define what's going on here is I'm gonna take you through all the componentry list. So we're gonna start at the front. Upper control arms and lower control arms are virtually identical to what's found in ProRunner. But what we've done to keep the system a bolt-on system is we've removed the upper shock towers, we've reduced the diameter of the required shock, but we still have incredible suspension gains over stock. Now looking at our upper control arms here, you've seen this technology on our Bronco ProRunner suspension systems. 1.5 inch uniball, double adjuster sleeves, heim joints, heavy duty heim steering, just absolute beastly lower control arms, big 1 inch spherical bearings. Lower control arms are tabbed for a primary shock, anti-sway bar, links, and a secondary bypass. So a lot going on in these lower control arms. Now, if you look on the inside of the control arms, you're gonna see how much reinforcements and gusseting there are. Now, for this long travel front suspension system, it's gonna come with a builder's kit for your front CV axles. You're gonna reuse essentially a lot of your front drivetrain. Your front differential stays the same, and even your front axles. Rather than replace the entire assembly, you're gonna get these builder axles. These builder axles pull out of your factory CVs, you press these in, you're gonna use the provided OEM Oetiker replacement clamps, and you're gonna essentially rebuild your existing CV axles. It's more cost effective, but equally impressive suspension performance. All right, so something that's really neat about this suspension system is it actually utilizes any OEM replacement Ford Bronco front coilover. So actually the coilover system that comes on your mid-runner suspension is identical as far as length of shock, upper and lower mounts. Simple respring and some adjustments on your valving, you've now got a shock adaptable to our long travel suspension. The idea here is you can kind of go from a mid travel to a long travel and grow into that system. So you don't have to rebuy a lot of the components. Now, no two ride heights are the same, no two drivers are the same. Our shocks are gonna come sprung and valved for what we think is a really good setting point. But if you happen to have a heavy winch in the front or aftermarket heavy front bumper, we can get the spring rates and the valving dialed in for you and your driving application. So highly customizable, high performing, and just really beautiful parts. All right, guys, so I'm standing in front of the rear long travel, long arm Bronco suspension system. Now, if you look at the suspension componentry involved, you've got new lower control arms, upper control arms, track bar brackets, long 14-inch 2.5 series coilovers. One of the only ways we were able to get additional wheel travel out of the back is to raise the shock mount locations. Just like in ProRunner series, we have a very similar rear upper shock tower. This rear upper shock tower bolts to your factory tower, has some weld-on tubes here that kind of reinforce it. Now this allows us to get an additional 8 to 10 inches of a taller shock in there. And that's how we're able to get leading in-class rear wheel travel for this Ford Bronco application. Now guys, check out the comparison between a OEM Bilstein SAS rear shock versus the rear shock systems that we're using in our Bronco rear long travel suspension system. This is a 14-inch long coilover. You got about a foot of additional shock length on here. That equates to more wheel travel, greater function in any off-road environment. One of the great parts about this rear shock system as well is it's interchangeable. You can adjust upper and lower springs, compression settings, rebound settings, on-the-fly adjustment settings. It's a modular system. You're not stuck with one way or another. This is our APG proprietary long arm rear link system. It consists of 2 upper control arms, 2 lower control arms, and a track bar. We accomplish a lot of things by switching to this long arm system. First is we need misalignment. With increased shock length and increased suspension travel, we need the misalignments in these joints. We also need the rear axle to track better. Anytime your rear axle is cycling, it brakes in that halfway point. As it brakes over the breakover, your axle's now cycling forward, which is why when we extend the link, the rear axle is cycling almost up and down, just like some of the race cars that you see. You guys, these joints are the best in business. These are Johnny joints. Forged housing, they're rebuildable. They got Zerk fittings on them. These things last for years. They're quiet and they're strong. And they have the greatest misalignment out of any other rebuildable joint there is. Pair that with some 2-inch DOM tube, they're virtually indestructible. And they look good. All right, tie rods. Standard for Bronco long travel front suspension system are these Heim tie rod systems. It's got tubular billet rods, Heim joints on the inner and on the outer, all the misalignments, tapered fittings, inner clevis, hardware to get it all attached. These are all double adjustable so you can get all your alignments on the fly. These will come with specialized boots that cover the clevis and the inner joint so you don't get any moisture intrusion into your rack and pinion. We know these tie rods are gonna last. We've been running these on multiple vehicle platforms and especially Bronco ProRunner. We've been running these in the desert harder than anybody else. And Heim joints are indestructible. And that's really all there is to say about it. There's a reason the race cars use them, and there's a reason that we are using them here. So it's great to know in terms of steering for the Ford Bronco, you're gonna be taken care of here. All right, guys, so now you're probably asking yourself, I've got this wider front suspension, how about the rear axle? Standard Bronco long travel rear does not replace the rear axle. The rear axle from Ford is incredible. It's the Dana 44 housing. It's got strong tubes, strong ring and pinion. It's got great gear sets. This particular axle assembly came with a 470 axle ratio. But the idea behind this system is you're not replacing the entire rear axle assembly. But in order to get our rear suspension system onto this rear axle assembly, we had to change all the bracketry so we can get that misalignment, get the travel that you expect and want out of a high performance suspension system. Now, we're looking at the axle. This has already been fabricated and assembled. You will essentially remove your axle, chop off the factory axle bracketry, and re-weld on all the provided axle bracketry. Upper control arm mounts, lower control arm mounts, primary and secondary shock mounts, rear track bar mount on the back, and then weld on your upper track bar bracket and your lower control arm points on the frame. Back to the question that you may be asking yourself is, hey, I'm now 3.5 inches wider per side in the front, but I didn't change my rear axle out because I wanted to I wanted to reuse my rear axle. How do I get the width? Now, there is no magic to that. There's only 2 options. Option A is you have to replace your rear axle with a wider assembly, and we do have that as an option. Or you run a smaller backspace wheel, or incorporate the use of a wheel spacer. Our ideal scenario for this is just add a 2-inch wheel spacer. Now, wheel spacers maybe have a bad rap, because a lot of times you hear them being used incorrectly. We would never put a wheel spacer on a front steering axle. But on a rear solid axle, that just cycles up and cycles down, that is hub-centric, lug-centric, made from American 6061 aluminum, grade 8 hardware studs, installed correctly, guys, you're not gonna have a problem. It's just a reality of wheel spacers. Essentially, you're also gonna need the wheel spacers, not just for looks, but we are running an outboard shock system, dropping right down here. Now you're gonna get your big wheel and your big tire on here. We need that backspace a little bit to get the clearance. So if you wanna stay practical, 2-inch wheel spacer is just fine, 1.5, kind of depending on the offsetting of your wheels. But essentially that's how we're able to get the rear long travel suspension system installed and not replace the entire rear end. Now you may be asking yourselves, how does this long travel suspension system compare to that of the Bronco Raptor? Great question. We're gonna give you numbers. Numbers don't lie. Front suspension articulation on this overall usable wheel travel is 12.75 inches of front usable wheel travel. Bronco Raptor is just about 11. Rear suspension, this is 16.5 inches of usable wheel travel. Bronco Raptor, just shy of 14. So we've got increased front and increased rear wheel travel over Bronco Raptor. Not to mention adjustable coilovers, adjustable spring rates and valving, secondary shock options, stronger, longer joints, better misalignment. Plus you gotta kind of build it your way. Let's talk about tire size. The ideal tire size for this suspension system is between a 35 and a 37-inch tall tire. You're reusing your factory front axle, your rear axle, your CV joints, the rear drive shaft. These are your limiting factors in tire size. Putting tires too large that the drivetrain can't handle, you're gonna have mechanical issues. So the sweet spot for us is in between a 35 and a 37. Now, if you wanna go bigger, if you wanna kick it up a notch, you gotta see ProRunner. All right, guys, in come ProRunner. We needed 2 tables for all the equipment that are laid out on these tables, and this isn't even all of it. Well, look at all the parts that come on your ProRunner suspension. Dennis 60 axles, upper control arms, lower control arms, big shocks, big axles, big drive shafts, CV assemblies. The parts list is massive. But with massive, you get massive performance. That was the goal the entire time with ProRunner. So if mid-travel or a standard bolt-on long travel just wasn't enough for you, maybe ProRunner is where it's at. All right, we're standing in front of just some of the parts for the front Bronco ProRunner long travel suspension system. We're gonna start at the components. Big, beastly lower control arms, spherical bearings, 17.4 misalignments. This lower control arm is almost indestructible in any off-road environment. It's thick. Internal gusseting, it's just built beyond belief. Same idea with the upper control arms. Double adjustable sleeves, big 1.5-inch bearings, Heim joints, beautiful caps, incredible adjustability right there on the car. Heavy duty steering tie rod systems, turnbuckles, heavy duty Heims on the inner and the outer. Really guys, this front suspension system is indestructible. Now, the great part about Bronco ProRunner suspension system is it's got a whole new upper shock tower. We didn't even have room on this table. It's over on the overflow table. But that's allowing us to fit this massive race series king coilover up front. It's a 3-inch diameter shock. It's got internal bypass, secondary long fin race reservoirs, compression adjusters, incredible shock valving, incredible rebound settings. And again, we've got these shock systems dialed for a variety of on-road and off-road driving. But sky's the limit in the adjustability of these performance shock systems. As I say all the time, no 2 drivers are the same, no 2 different speeds are the same. Me, I like to drive fast. It's probably too fast, I'm scaring people as passengers in the car, but everyone's got a different driving style. And I'm gonna double down on it and say it again, that the part that really separates ProRunner from just another OEM replacement kit is these are dialed to you, the end user. Kind of going through the components, something that we touched on before is you are actually able to run a primary shock, a secondary shock, and retain your factory anti-sway bar, even the electronic disconnect. So this arm and include a link system actually allows you to press out your factory arm, press this arm back on, use our provided link, and this has a different geometry, so it tucks behind the bypass. This is a complicated part to make, but we dialed it, so you get full OEM functionality. If you don't have a secondary shock, just use the factory arm, use the provided link system, and connect onto the lower control arm tabs. All right, guys, rear suspension on ProRunner. These rear coilovers are no joke. 3-inch diameter, internal bypass. Look at these reservoirs. These things are a foot long. Got compression adjusters built into them. These long fin resis just keep the shock oil nice and cool, so you're virtually gonna get no shock fade here. It's a dual rate coilover. It's got a super soft upper ride spring, and it's got your overload spring down here at the bottom that's gonna carry whatever weight you decide to put in the back. Awesome part about these shock systems, they're interchangeable. Whatever weight you wanna put in the back, hey, I wanna tow a little trailer, or I wanna drive a little stiffer, I wanna drive a little softer, the whole shock system is totally customizable. And you can't get that on any OEM shock. This is a 14-inch throw coilover. It's got a lot of wheel travel, and it's still within the limits that the Bronco can handle. In order to get these lower shocks fit under the Bronco, you're gonna use the ProRunner rear upper shock towers. It's gonna bolt to the top of your frame, raise it up about 10 inches, and that's what's gonna let you stuff this big guy underneath the Bronco. Now, eyelet to eyelet, this is the same length coilover as the rear long travel non-ProRunner suspension system. It's just a much larger shock body, bigger, stronger internals, race grade reservoirs, far more tuning and adjustment options here. And now we're gonna jump over to the other table and we're gonna show you what allows us to run a big 40-inch tall tire without braking. This is an Ultimate Dana 60 rear axle assembly. This thing is bulletproof. Dual taper outer bearings, 3.5-inch heavy wall axle tubes, massive 60 series pumpkin, 1350 yoke. It has a 76-inch wheel mount surface, so it has all the added width to match your long travel front suspension system. This axle is indestructible. It's also got all of our proprietary APG bracketry system for the long arm and the long travel shocks. All right, to match that heavy duty rear axle, you're gonna need a heavy duty rear drive shaft. This bolts right up to the transfer case and the rear axle. This thing is indestructible. These are the APG rear link system. This is for our long travel suspension system. This has got the 2-inch 2M tubes, heavy duty. This is gonna give you a lot of adjustment in the rear. It's gonna give you a lot more travel and adjustment. All right, so you've seen the heavy duty rear axle. Now you gotta see the heavy duty front axle. ProRunner's got a whole different recipe. In order to get those large shocks and get that longer shock in there, we have to chop off your shock towers. Comes with a whole new weld-in shock tower that raises it up and reinforces everything with these multi-shear points. This is allowing us, again, to put a wider shock and a longer shock up in there. Now, what's the point of a strong rear axle without a strong front axle? A chain is only as strong as its weakest link, as we said, guys, so we need to reinforce everything. That's how we build the most reliable Bronco out there. Take a look at this huge Dana Advent 44. Iron casing, iron half shaft housing, 32 spline inners. These are the same front drive unit found on the Bronco DR. And look at the power that thing puts out. Now the Bronco front bolt-on long travel comes with a builder's bar and a rebuild kit. ProRunner's a whole new front drive system entirely. Heavy duty front axle, extended length 300M, heavy duty RCV axle assemblies. You don't need to rebuild them, put them in and they're good to go. All right guys, if you're gonna go with our bolt-on long travel suspension or the full ProRunner suspension system, we still have the added options. Both suspension systems allow you to run a secondary bypass shock and optional front and rear bump stops. All right guys, so these are the front bypasses. They have long fin reservoirs. They're 3-2 bypasses with rebound adjustment. This works for both suspension systems. For the front, you are going to need the optional bypass weld-on hoops, but both long travel front lower control arms come tabbed already for bypasses. Both rear suspensions come with upper and lower secondary bypass mounts. These are the available bump stops. These are your weld-on front bump stops, which use can adjustable bumps. These are 2.0s, and a weld-on rear bump can, using the same adjustable 2.0 screw bump stops. Out here to the right, those are the long 12-inch 3-tube bypasses. They work with both suspension systems. They're 3-tube with rebound adjustment. They're race grade, and they have the long fin reservoirs. All right, guys, we're excited now to finally have all 3 of these suspension product offerings. Bronco Mid-Runner, known as our mid-travel suspension system. Front rear shocks, upper control arms, rear lower links, and tie rods. Great for the weekend warrior and for daily driving. Bronco Long Travel. You know, guys who want to have a little bit more fun, they have a little bit of a heavier foot, and they like to have fun. This is a bolt-on suspension system in the front, bolt-on, weld-on in the rear, delivering optimal performance on a 37-inch tall tire, still while maintaining great on-road drivability. And then, of course, Bronco ProRunner, the mega, the biggest, the baddest, the best of the best. Hands down, the leader in all of Bronco's suspension systems available to market. Big axles, big shocks, big tires, big fun, big smiles. It can take anything you throw at it. All right, guys, now we're talking about suspension. But remember, the APG wide body system with 3 individual flare options works for any one of these 3 different suspension packages. It's modular, highly adjustable, and that's why we made it and designed it the way that we did with the multiple flare options. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. I know I went over a lot of information here. If you need me to clarify anything or if you have any follow-up questions on these 3 suspension systems, feel free to give us a call. We're approachable and we love to help people out. Again, if you've enjoyed this content and you want to see some more of it, hit the subscribe button and we'll see you on the next one.